Are you overwhelmed by the challenge of personalizing communication for thousands of students? That's where Element 451's AI assistants come in. From nudging prospective students to guiding those already on their journey, AI assistants don't just automate, they write, build, and optimize every step of your digital campaigns. Discover how at element451.com/AI team.
Hi, I'm a higher ed CMO and I have a confession to make. I did not hear the term search cliff until Jenny Petty mentioned it sometime this last summer. Jenny is the Vice President of Marketing, Communications, Experience, and Engagement at the University of Montana, which is a position she has held for the last 4 years. When she was describing the search cliff to me, it kind of gave me a little bit of heart palpitations. And I'm not going to spoil it because she's going to immediately jump into explaining what it is in this episode. But if you're a higher ed marketer, if you're in enrollment management, if you're a CFO, if you are any sort of institutional leader, you really need to listen to this episode because what Jenny and I talk about is something that is going to or has the potential to completely shift how we market and recruit students in the coming years permanently. Welcome to Confessions of a Higher Ed CMO, a podcast that empowers higher ed marketers to bring innovation, creativity, and excellence to their work. I'm your host, Jaime Hunt. Join me every 2 weeks for discussions with some of the best minds in higher education marketing. Confessions of a Higher Ed CMO is part of the Enrollify Network, a robust collection of podcasts designed to help higher educational professionals like you grow. Explore our other shows at enrollify.org or check out some of my personal favorites linked in the show notes below. Enrollify is made possible by Element 451, the leading AI-powered all-in-one student engagement platform, helping institutions create meaningful, personalized, and engaging interactions with students. Learn more at element451.com. I'm absolutely delighted to be here with Jenny Petty. Jenny, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Jamie. I'm so excited to join you.
I've been wanting to have Jenny on the show for a long time, but I kind of strong-armed her when she was at AMA talking about this absolutely fascinating topic that we're going to discuss today, and that is the search cliff. And I feel like Jenny is the only person I've heard talking about this, and I feel like it's such an important topic, but I had never heard of search cliff before Jenny started talking about it. I know we've all heard about the demographic cliff, but what the heck is the search cliff and how is that different from the demographic cliff?
So I feel a little bit like I'm the canary in the coal mine right now in higher ed because I'm not hearing a lot of people talk about this. And honestly, it wasn't even on my radar until about 8 months ago. We've been talking about the demographic cliff for 10 plus years, right? Which is the issue with that we're having a population decline with the students who will be 2025 graduating. So we won't have as many high school seniors as we usually have. We've beaten that topic to death. We talk about it all the time. What we are not talking about is kind of this collision of all of these issues that are happening at the same time that we are calling the search cliff. And I stole that terminology from College Vine, which is a vendor, but it's the collision of the fact that there are a lot of things happening in the world right now. So privacy laws are changing really rapidly. There's 20 plus states that have already enacted privacy laws around students. There is the fact that going test optional during COVID changed the playing field of the availability of names that we purchase. And so if people on this who are listening today aren't super familiar with purchasing of names, I highly recommend they go out and read Who Gets In and Why by Jeff Salingo, which I think is a great history of enrollment marketing. But because of privacy and the availability of names dropping because of test optional, we're going to have less names that can be purchased. And our enrollment management teams really rely on purchasing names to fill the top of the funnel. And so they go out and they purchase names all over the place. And they're using, in some cases, really sophisticated predictive modeling to do that. It's not like they're just blasting out names. They are being as sophisticated as they can be. But the total names available is going to drop by up to 80% in the next couple of years
Whoa.
in some cases. And it has massive impacts on equity and equality when it comes to who it's going to impact. And we're not talking about this. And we're not talking about how our marketing teams on many of our campuses are going to have to shift the work that they do to better support enrollment management.
How swiftly is this coming up? I mean, is this like we're worried about it for fall 2026 class, or is this something a little bit farther down the road, or when is the big impact?
It's already happening. Let me give you the most startling statistic that I think is kind of showing what's to come. So in 2019, RNL did a report that said if you purchased 100,000 names, 131 of those names would yield and become a student at your school.
Wait. 100,000 and 131 would yield. Okay.
Yep, 131 would yield. So that was about a 0.131% yield rate. In 2023, College Vine repeated that study, and they found that if you purchased 100,000 names, you would get 43 enrollments. So we have
Whoa.
dropped from 0.131% to 0.043% yield rate. So it's already happening. And I can give you some more statistics about this. Yield rate has dropped nationally by like 56%. We're just seeing drops all across the board when it comes to what is happening to those purchased names that we've purchased. It should be startling people. So I'm glad to talk with you today about this because I haven't heard anybody else talking about this yet either.
Well, and this is something, I mean, heads up, if you're one of my clients, you're probably listening to this right now because I've sent this to you because I mean this is huge. My entire career, 20 years working in higher education, name buys were the number one way of getting people at that top of funnel. And this is truly terrifying because how do you then get those top of funnel names? I mean, do you have thoughts around what you can do?
So I think the private sector, no shocker here, the private sector has been ahead of higher ed for a long time. When I first came to higher ed after, a dozen years in the private sector, I was actually shocked that we still bought names. I mean, that seemed to me like a 1980s strategy. Um, but as I started to learn about it, I understood why and it made sense. But in the private sector, they've really leaned into that organic lead gen, and paid lead gen. So we're talking about inbound marketing, content marketing, nurturing leads from the very, very top of the funnel all the way through in a way that is a little bit different than maybe what our enrollment teams have traditionally done, which is very high touch. Typically you come in, you get put into a comms flow. As your interest, you indicate that you're interested. The enrollment team starts to get more engaged with you all the way to the end of the funnel, which is really almost like, I think, purchasing a car by the time you get to the end of it. You are one-on-one with a counselor making that decision. I think we're going to have to get a lot smarter about our organic lead gen and our paid lead gen efforts. And so that's going to be really leaning into that content marketing, the creation of pathways that address a lot of different interests, a lot of different areas that students and parents are looking for help with. I think it's going to be leaning into our paid media efforts, which so many of us are struggling with right now and not having the budget to do robust media purchasing. And I think when we think about how crowded the marketplace is getting and how competitive it's going to be getting, this is an area that I don't think a lot of our campuses are ready for or funded to really support. Also, social media. I think it's getting into both organic and paid social and looking for. I feel like there's this arms race right now about what's going to fill the gap, what's going to be the name buying of the future, right? And like we see in the name buying space, there's all sorts of things. There's Encora, there's College Express, there's Niche, there's College Board, of course, which is like the number one. I think what we're seeing is, especially with the rise of AI, all of these new technologies popping up that are helping to fill the gap of. So campuses won't have to be on their own. There are partners out there, but no one has risen to the top yet to be the replacement.
I want to back up a little bit and talk about that drop in basically the yield of the name buys. So if we have gotten to the point where it's 0.43% of the names we buy actually yield as students.
0.043.
Wait, 0.043. Okay. Why are we buying names to begin with?
I think we are continuing to buy names because we have not come to a place where we trust that any other tactic will work. And I think inbound marketing takes years to get a good inbound marketing program built, right? It is a lot of work. It's a lot of expectation on your marketing communications team to create content, to be managing and adjusting campaigns. And so I think it's a little bit of the case that happens in higher ed, which is like we've always done it this way. And so we are holding on, continuing to try to do it this way. And I think, there still is some value, especially with the predictive modeling. If we can go out and buy names and they are names that are more likely to attend because they match a certain set of criteria that makes sense for our student personas, then it does still make sense. But I think Marcom teams have to learn to supplement more. And that's the part that I don't think is happening on a lot of campuses.
You said we did this because we've always done it, which is like, I think the mantra of higher education, that's like, we all have that tattooed on our arms. And so when we think about like shifting and changing how we do things to respond to this, but also I think just to be more effective marketers, right? What do you think higher ed marketing offices need to be thinking about with that shift? And what do leaders need to be thinking about when they're budgeting for that shift?
So I think the first thing is, obviously, and this from all of your work, higher ed teams, Marcom teams there's probably 4,000 institutions in the US and there's probably 2,000 different models of the way that they're structured. If you are in a Marcom team that is not really responsible for any sort of enrollment marketing, the first thing you need to do is educate yourself on the world of enrollment. So go out and read Jeff Salingo's book, read the David Brooks article that just came out in The Atlantic, which I think gives you a really good perspective of the long-term history of higher ed. And start to form that relationship with your enrollment management team. Because if you don't have that, that's the basis of all of this. You're not going to build their trust to try anything new without having that relationship or the knowledge of their world. And I think also, Jamie, you know this well, but not everyone knows this, right? Like sometimes there's some resistance on the part of marketers to be tied to revenue generating. I think traditionally in higher ed, that's not something that we have been necessarily aligned with, and we have to start thinking that way. Too many of our institutions are going to rely on our work to be maybe the difference maker in a closure or not a closure. And so understanding revenue models, understanding how to calculate marketing ROI, how to run real campaigns, what you're going to need budget-wise for those campaigns, and how to tell that story to your CFO and your president, I think incredibly important. And now's the time, right now. Actually, the time was probably 5 years ago, but now start right now.
I was just having a conversation literally leading up to joining this call with someone who we worked together in the past, and the institution we worked at has a $51 million deficit. And they've really the president that's been at that institution for a while now has been there for a long time. And we were talking about how so many higher ed leaders are coming up through faculty, and maybe they're like a physicist or they're a historian or something, and they may not have that business background that I think is just super needed right now. And I do you think that also applies to the marketers that are working in higher ed? And I hate saying that as someone who did this for 20 years.
Yeah.
But I put a lot of effort into trying to understand the business side. And how can a marketer do that?
Yeah, I think the days of only focusing on storytelling or brand are over. And I think we have to adjust. And if you've only ever worked in the world of higher ed, which many have, and there's really good people out there who have done that, you may not have been exposed to the business side. You might not understand the way that marketing can plug in, but there are so many great resources out there to help you understand and help you adjust the way you're thinking. And I think also listening to podcasts like yours and understanding the network that is out there and available for you to learn these things. This year at AMA and our senior leader experience, we had a CFO come for the first time and talk to us about his perspective. And I thought that was so hugely helpful. And we need more of that. We need to understand our peers on campus and what their perspective is and what they're looking for, because that helps us to better communicate with them the importance of the work we're doing and how we can support their goals.
I think if you're a president listening to this and you don't already have your marketer at the cabinet level table, this is a really strong case for that, because that's where I started to be exposed to the business side of the institution, is when I was at the cabinet level and having a really healthy curiosity and asking the questions. And the first cabinet I was on was so healthy in the way that we were allowed to ask dumb questions to educate ourselves. And it was encouraged, and nobody looked down on you for being like, hey, I don't understand, why does this matter, or why would we do it like this? But asking those questions, really getting to know your CFO, being curious, reading every single thing that Jeff Salingo writes, read that. I mean,
Yeah.
and dig in.
And understanding budget models, right? Like, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I've been at two different flagship institutions, and the budget models have been different at both of them and have changed while I've been at them. And so understanding what that means, um, understanding the way that the college budgets are working and how the deans have to report is hugely helpful. Um, yeah, I mean, I think that's the biggest thing, is just educating yourself as much as you can and getting curious about maybe parts of the business model that you don't understand.
Yeah, when you talked about the funding model, I was on 3 cabinets and everyone had a drastically different funding model, and everyone had a drastically different way that they dispersed funds and how they managed the budget. And I've been in environments where you were encouraged to ask questions. I've been in environments where it was like, don't worry your pretty little head about this. Like, don't be dissuaded by, if you're getting don't worry your pretty little head by this. Like, put the effort in, talk to other marketers, talk to other CMOs, see if you can, talk to their CFO. I mean, this is really important stuff. And I really want to like highlight something that you said, which is that for higher education to thrive, for our institutions to thrive, we have to play a really active role in that.
We do. And I think, you hear it over and over again in the industry how frustrated marketers are about not being recognized as the strategic partners or the strategic thinkers or the strategic problem solvers, which is the way I think of the work that we do. Some of that is our campuses deserve our angst a little bit, right? I do think some of that is well earned. But some of it is also because we are not showing up in a way that makes us more relevant than what people think we do. I gave a presentation to cabinet a couple of weeks ago about this, and I shared with them, here's what you might think about marketing, here's what we are actually doing, and here's why. And I think we need more of those conversations to happen. And you might say, well, our chief legal counsel doesn't need to understand this. And it's like, no, they actually do. Because when we're
Mhm.
trying to get a software that we need and we're coming against barriers, they need to understand how important it is for us to have the tools that we need to get this work done.
Do you think that this is a temporary challenge, or do you think this is going to reshape how we market and recruit?
I just think overall right now, historically, the way the world is, I think we are on the cusp of like a really big moment in history across the board. And I think technology has changed so much that I don't think we will go back. First of all, we're not going to demographically have the number of names that we used to have. So we're not going to go back to being able to purchase 100,000 names and yield 131 enrollments. I don't think that's happening. I think we have to get more creative about the work that we're doing. We have to get more creative about the pedagogy that we're offering on our campuses and be more relevant to consumers. That's a huge one, right? It's like we've got some product problems in higher ed, but I don't see it going back to the way it was.
I met with somebody earlier this week who was saying that they did their last round of brand research in 2019, and they're realizing in 2025, the pandemic was like basically a hard reset. Like, there is a totally different student right now, a totally different desires, totally different expectations, beyond just the generational shift between whatever we're calling them, Gen Alpha and
Yeah.
Gen Z and
Yeah.
whatever names we're giving them now. But I think that, so their point was like, hey, can you come help us think about is this positioning that we've only had for 5 years? I mean, really, that's not that long. Is it still relevant? Is it still something that we can rely on for telling our story, for getting students in the door? And I'm happy to help with that, but I also think and appreciate that they're also thinking about like delivery models and what they're teaching and how long the programs take and things like that, because it's not just how you market it. It's not just how you tell the story. It's the product. And I think a couple episodes ago, if folks haven't listened to it yet, I interviewed the VP at Bethel who talked about the pricing strategy. And he led as the CMO, the repricing that they did. They dropped their tuition by like 40 something percent or something like that. And that's, I mean, in the private sector, we would be doing that, right?
Yep, 100%.
And here it's like we're just making stuff pretty.
Sometimes, yeah, or not having the work that we're doing be I think there's such a focus on measurement, right? And sometimes, even though we can measure more than we've ever been able to in marketing, there is still the challenge of not everything can be measured. And so we have to go off of anecdote or sentiment, and that can be really challenging. And I think that can be challenging when you're talking to a CFO who can measure every single thing and has, our CFO has to have a special laptop because his Excel spreadsheets are so massive. Like I think there's some challenges there too of sure, that going back to the 4 Ps of marketing and how often on our campuses maybe we're only getting to represent 1 or 2 of the 4 Ps.
Yeah. So I'm really curious about your thoughts on what proactive strategies higher ed marketers should be thinking about. And I do have some listeners who are enrollment management people. Like, what should those people be thinking about right now?
Yeah. So same thing with the enrollment management folks. If you don't have a good relationship with your marketers, start forming that. Start forming, getting curious about their work, curious about their teams. I think, Jamie, we've got to talk about team structure and org structure when we're talking about this shift, because maybe some of the traditional roles that we've had on our teams, especially with the rise of AI, are going to also shift. So when we think about tactics to better support organic lead gen, we're talking about creating really strong inbound marketing programs, which rely on content that is not news writing. It's marketing writing, it's gated content pieces, it's white papers, it's, you know, really strategic blog work. It's a lot of digital marketing. And I mean, I can speak from experience. Very rarely are our teams designed to support true inbound marketing because it is a heavy lift. It can bear so much fruit, and once you create a campaign in inbound, it lives for a long time and it can just roll. And it's like creates that momentum. But getting it going takes a year or 2 or 3. So I think org structure is something that we have to think a lot about. I think like we talked about earlier, that paid media strategy, when we talk about lead gen, hugely important. I think Seth Odell is probably the best in our space about what that looks like and what you need to be doing. I love the way he describes, are you playing offense or defense? Because I think also depending on your brand position in the market right now, that's going to influence what you need to do. So if you're one of the big 12 schools that's solely relying on reputation to drive admission, maybe you don't have to worry about this right now. Maybe you will in 10 years. 5 years, who knows, right? But for institutions like the University of Montana, we're fighting tooth and nail for every student that we get here. And we are coming out of what was a 10-year enrollment decline. So a lot of people might not know this, but between 2011 and 2019, the University of Montana had a 40% decrease in enrollment. So we've already kind of seen
Wow.
the writing on the wall here. Yeah. Which in a lot of ways has given this long runway for this hunger to fix quickly and move quickly and iterate. And I love that. I'm very lucky to be in an environment like that where we don't have a lot of barriers to trying things. I also
Um,
think, okay, one more good tip. Go out and read what Element 451 and Halda are doing around the request for information forms on websites. Like, we are experimenting with Halda. We have been for about a year now. It is an incredible difference in what we're seeing in the way that students are moving through our website and converting from a visitor to a lead, which the RFI form, might be a thing of the past. And so that's another thing that people should be looking into right now.
as we're moving forward and we're thinking about the future, I have historically over 20 years, it's been like all we care about is having applications go up. We want more applications than last year. And then we want more enrollments than last year, right? Do you think that this change, this search cliff, this shift that we need to be making needs to change what that quote unquote recruitment success looks like?
That's such a good question. I think overall there are going to be a lot of shifts when it looks like what does recruitment success look like. I think this fall we still saw classes making record-breaking, you know, numbers, and that's awesome. Is that going to be the norm going forward? Probably not. And how is that going to feel for a campus that's been used to doing that year over year? Probably pretty scary. And I think, our poor enrollment management colleagues, boy, do they take a lot of pressure and blame on these campuses. So we've got to rethink their positions, and we've got to rethink the burden that they carry on behalf of our institutions. I think we've been talking about diversifying our markets for a long time. We've been talking about going after degree completers, which there are so many in this country. Our husbands are two of them that did that late in life. Not late in life, gosh, I make it sound like he's like 80. My husband just turned 40, sorry. But we talk about degree completers. We talk about continuing education. Like, I still don't think a lot of our campuses have truly tapped into those markets in a thoughtful way. And so we've got to think about recruiting success of more than just the traditional undergrad. But it's going to look different and it's going to feel different. And we have to be willing, I think, to redefine what success looks like.
Well, I think too, one of the things I've been pushing on since I was at Winston-Salem State, because it was important to us there, is you can't just think about the students that are coming in. You have to think about the students that are there, and keeping them there also can grow your enrollment. So if you have,
100%.
A 75% retention rate from freshman to sophomore years, that's 25% of the students that if you could keep even, another 5%, that's going to grow your enrollment or keep your enrollment stronger. And I think there's a moral imperative, right? To
Yes.
make sure our students don't just come and drop tens of thousands of dollars on their first year and dip.
Yes.
Or, the first 2 years and dip.
And I think that has to do with, a lot of the reputation repair work that we have to do as an industry is that we have let a lot of people down. And we have offered maybe products that haven't made sense for them. And that's on us. That's not on the consumer. And so I think you're right. Retention is a huge thing. At Wyoming during COVID, we actually added a retention marketing position because it became so important. That's something that I'd like to see more of, when we're talking about org structure, is having, a position or two that are focused on continuing to help keep our students here and make sure that we understand why are they leaving. Because if it's something we can solve for, then we should be solving for it. And I'm very lucky here to have such a great partner in Leslie Webb, Dr. Leslie Webb, who is our vice president of student success and enrollment management. And she is a phenomenal partner, but very much looking forward to continuing to work on that. Because you're right, keeping a customer is a lot easier than gaining a customer. And I know we hate to call them customers.
But they are. Really, realistically. I love the positions that merge that student affairs and enrollment management, because it's like enrollment management seems to be more focused on transactional type stuff, like getting the students in the door, getting them registered for classes, getting their financial aid. I'm very much generalizing here. But then the student affairs or student life or whatever you call it on your campus, that's more that group that's focused on belonging and involvement and co-curriculars and keeping you feeling connected to the campus. When you pair those two, I think there's some magic that can happen there.
I agree. I think this is a recent change on our campus, but I think it's a really good one. When we're talking about calculating marketing ROI, we don't want to just be thinking about our first year students. We want to be thinking about the lifetime value of a student. We can't get that without partnering with our CFO and our student success or student affairs group.
We've talked a little bit about this, but I want to touch on it a little bit more. And that is that collaboration between Marcom and enrollment management. And I think I've talked about this before on this podcast, but when I started at ODU, there was pretty much literally no relationship between the two offices. The Marcom office was doing top of funnel work without even involving enrollment management, and enrollment management was doing all this other stuff without involving marketing. And we worked really, really hard to change that. And I'm really happy about that. But like, have you seen that? And what are some of the challenges that can be caused by that?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think every school probably has a different model. At Montana, our enrollment marketing team is, and I say team, it's currently 2 people who are embedded in the central unit, and then they serve the admissions and enrollment management offices. But I see that in other ways, there's schools that have full-on enrollment marketing teams embedded in admissions, and then the main office or central office just works on high-level branding or assistance with design or things like that. I always think about the relationship between Marcom and enrollment management like a marriage. Like there is tension from time to time. Sometimes one partner is giving more than the other. Sometimes we can be mad at each other, but we have to remember to keep the band together and keep moving forward. I think it's Marcom's job to represent the brand and represent consumers the same way that it's admissions job to come back and say, here's what we're hearing in the field. On our campus, we have a great relationship with our enrollment management team, and I think that's in part to really approaching it like a partnership. So we've had very clear conversations around funnel stage and who's responsible for what and what technologies are we partnering on and what technologies is the Marcom department paying for that we want to use to do this, this, and this. And it's been hugely fruitful. But I've also, at Wyoming, when I first got there, there was no enrollment marketing function, and the poor admissions department had a designer working with them, but they wrote all of their own copy. They were putting stuff out to bid for print. Like it was like, whoa, this is not, you should be expecting more out of your marketing department. And we grew it over time. And the director of admissions there, Shelly Dodd, is still a really good friend of mine. But that wasn't without challenging, like, hey, you've always done it this way, but can we help you do it maybe this way? And we got to a really good place with them. That was such a good, strong relationship.
If you haven't listened yet to, it's one of my first episodes. It's like brought to you by the letters NTR, where I interviewed Brent Schock at Miami, and we worked together really, really closely. But I remember on my first or second day, Brett called me and was like, hey, so my success is dependent on yours. Yours is dependent on mine. Like we need to be hand in glove. And we talked through like, if we disagree about something, how are we going to approach it? And we're going to be adults. And to kind of play on your marriage metaphor, it was like, we're not going to go to bed angry. If we have an issue with what one or the other of us has done or not done, we're going to hash it out. We're not going to sit and just let that fester and damage the relationship. And we both had team members that worked together that sometimes they would clash, right? Because that happens. Like my lead enrollment marketing person and his lead admissions person sometimes disagreed about things, but we were always like, you can't take the ball and go home. We have to we're in this for the long haul.
Yeah.
And having that mentality, I think, makes it a little bit easier. It really helped that Brent is like literally the most lovely human being on the planet. And I couldn't have asked for a better colleague. But sometimes you have to put your ego aside and realize that like this piece that I think is my responsibility, that I think they've swam in my lane or splashed me in my lane, we're working toward the same goal, people.
Mhm.
Like we're trying to accomplish the same thing.
Yeah.
Put that ego aside.
It's really true, and I think you have to have that humility, and you have to understand that, you're gonna make mistakes, you're gonna miss deadlines, you're gonna be frustrated with each other, but it's not about blaming one another for something. It's about, okay, how do we find the way to move forward? And that's been such a good experience, especially with we have a new AVP of enrollment here, Drew Riley, and he's just been a fantastic leader who has come in and worked really, in addition to our director of admissions, Kelly Nolan. They're just awesome, and we love working with them. So it's been really good. I was going to go back and tell you really quickly, when you said the NTR thing, when I interviewed at the University of Montana, I think something that made me stand out, unbeknownst to me, was I talked about discounting models in my interview with the CFO. And he said to me, "You're the first marketing person to ever understand and talk to me about discounting models." And so I think that's another area that we have to understand. Net tuition revenue, you've got to understand what your discount rate is, how that's being applied, what the financial aid strategy is. Those are all areas that will help you do your job better when it comes to enrollment marketing.
Learn, grow. Like be curious. So NDR is net tuition revenue, and it's like what you end up with at the end of the day after all the discounting that you do for a student. I didn't know what that was until I started working with Brent. I mean, I knew what it was, but I hadn't been at a school that cared that much about it because I hadn't been at a school that did a lot of discounting. But that absolutely, I'm sure your CFO was like, oh, yeah, she knows her stuff. And another thing I'll say, and I was talking to the friend before recording that I mentioned earlier, is with your CFO, when they ask you tough questions, when they ask you questions about like, why would we do it like this? Or show me the ROI on this or fill in the blank. Just not being defensive can earn so many brownie points. Like you can be like, hey, that's a valid question. That is an appropriate question for a CFO to ask, right?
Yeah.
A CFO is fiscally responsible for the health of the institution. It is reasonable for them to ask, question, push you, challenge you. And don't be defensive about that. Be really, really open to being able to justify the work. And if you can't, be plain about that. But
Yeah.
if I have found that if you're more upfront about understanding that those are valid questions, you just get a much better relationship with your CFO.
I think that's true. And I also think what's helped me in the past is, rather than positioning of like, we need this much money, you want to say that, but you also want to say, and this is the consequence if we don't do this. And that for me with CFOs seems to help.
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
Especially if the consequence is less revenue or more expense at some point. Like they're thinking about numbers, right?
Yeah.
A really good CFO also understands reputation and the long game and how, reputation
Yes.
doesn't just mean this year, that kind of
Yeah.
thing. But they're about numbers, and when you talk to them, sometimes you have to be too.
I mean, I think the reputation part is a really good point, Jamie, because, our CFO sends out our Moody's report pretty frequently. And I always find that a really interesting read. And I think for other folks, that might be something that I wasn't super familiar with until I came to this role of, what's your, I'm not going to say it right. It's not your credit score. What is it? It's like
It's
think about it as your higher ed credit score. I don't
yeah,
know.
that's what
Yeah.
I always think about it as. And it's your bond rating,
Yes.
right? Is
Thank you.
that
Yes.
yes, yeah. I had to sit and think for a
Yeah.
second. Yeah, sitting in on those calls,
Hmm.
was just, like, super fascinating.
Yeah.
Sit in on things, like,
Hmm.
go to
Yeah.
meetings you think are boring. If you're skipping your finance and administration board meetings, you're making a huge mistake because that's where they start to talk about, like, that nitty-gritty, and they're
Hmm.
usually explaining things to board members because there will be board members in the room that aren't necessarily business leaders or accounting people or whatever. So they're going to be explaining it in that plain English and a lot of times. And that's a really good time for you to be like, oh, I'm taking notes. Now I
Yeah.
know this. Now I know that. Um, so go to every one of those meetings. Go to every committee meeting. I mean, you learn so much about student affairs, enrollment management, all the areas of the institution. Athletics plays an important
Hmm.
part in the finances of an institution.
Yes.
So don't skip those.
Yeah.
Um, so so looking ahead, how do you think things are going to evolve, like in the next year and then the next 5 years, for enrollment marketing?
I think in the next year, there might be some panic. Especially, I think, what I'm hearing across the board this year is that applications are down at a lot of places. And I think there's going to be SHIT moment of, wow, we've got to make some shifts. So I think this next year is going to be a big tell in terms of people rapidly trying to adopt new technologies. I mean, we're doing some amazing stuff with AI. We're working with College Vine on. We've got an AI recruiter on our website. We've got an AI phone call counselor recruiter that will roll out later this month, which sounds super creepy, but oh my gosh, is it awesome? It is so awesome. And so I think, people are going to see tools that are popping up that are really innovative. And if you're on a campus that's brave enough to try them, you're going to see yield from that. In the next 5 years, I mean, I think we're still going to be reckoning with God knows what this administration is going to bring for higher ed, and the value of education in this country. But I just read a book. Well, I actually read it in one sitting last night. It's called On Tyranny: 20 Lessons from the 20th Century, and I think everyone in higher ed should read it because it talks about how important our institutions are. And I know so many of our campuses are doing democracy work right now, but boy, did it really nail home for me why this work is so important on a much larger cultural, societal scale. So, I mean, the next 5 years might be kind of scary. Who knows, right? But I think I think we put one foot in front of another and we just keep going.
Yep. It's that old, like, eating the elephant one bite at a time
Mhm.
kind of metaphor.
Yeah.
Do you have any other advice for either CMOs, aspiring CMOs, enrollment management VPs, aspiring enrollment management VPs?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've talked on this episode so much about curiosity, and I think that is the part of these jobs that keep them interesting, keeps you not bored, and makes you ready for the next role is to just learn as much as you can. And gosh, are we in environments that are so good for that? And so I think that's the biggest thing. If you're an aspiring leader, it's learn as much as you can, learn as much as you can about yourself. And that self-awareness is such a huge part of becoming a leader and being a good leader. Yeah. And just I think higher ed needs really good people. And we need people to stay. And so whatever you have to do to keep that fire in your belly about this work, do it.
That's such good advice because I think that I'm afraid, and I just saw somebody who I think is really, really excellent post that he's leaving higher ed. And I saw somebody else like a week ago post the same thing, and I just get really anxious about that. Like, I want us to have and keep the good people and keep people who are invested in it. And that book that you mentioned on tyranny, that is going on my winter break reading list because I think if you can get a sense of, I think higher education is absolutely the foundation of our democracy, right? Like, or education generally, because we really need to have an educated populace in order to be a thriving country. And we're heading in a wrong direction, I'm afraid. But we need people who have that fire in their belly that they believe that too and are willing to do the work to keep higher ed moving forward. So
Hmm.
I think that's excellent advice. One last question, totally off topic, but I think something that I think is super cool. You had an entry in the Best Swag competition that was a finalist at AMA. It was the Nike N7 program. And you started telling me about that. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's so cool. We have to talk about that. So tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so the Nike N7 program was started by a gentleman named Sam McCracken, who actually is from Montana. I believe went to the University of Montana for a while, and Sam worked at Nike. He just announced his retirement, but he's a Native American gentleman. And the Nike N7 program began as a way to have college basketball celebrate Native American heritage and accomplishments. And we were lucky enough to start the N7 program, I think 2 years ago here. So I think it's been around for a long time. And Nike has a beautiful product line that they do that is designed with Native and Indigenous artists. But we took a little bit of a different approach here at Montana because we have, I think it's 8 recognized tribes in our state, and they are such an important part of our campus community. We have an amazing Native American center on campus. I have learned so much from Native American leaders on this campus about just all sorts of things. They are phenomenal. And what we wanted to do with the N7 program here was typically what happens is the basketball teams, men's and women's, just wear like a turquoise jersey, and that's the N7 program. And turquoise is a meaningful color in that community. And what we wanted to do was actually turn it into a larger representation and celebration of Native Americans and Indigenous people on our campus. And so what we've done is each year we've had a Native artist who's from Montana or has roots in Montana design a new Nike N7 logo for us. And so we have turned that into a whole retail line. And all of those proceeds go back to the Kiayo Powwow, which is one of the nation's oldest powwows. It's run by a student organization on our campus. It is breathtaking. I went to it my first year here and was just blown away. And we have rolled that into a massive celebration that the Nike N7 games, we invite our Native communities to come. We have Native high school students come. We use it as an opportunity. The halftime performance is usually something that you would see at a powwow, which is really, really beautiful. We do drum ceremony before the games. We really turned it into something that celebrates these people and shows them how important they are to us and to this community and gives them a chance to own their piece of history. Like there's crazy historical photos of teepees actually like on our campus before it was
Wow.
built. Yeah, it's startling. It's beautiful and sad and at the same time. And so we've really turned this into a larger program. And each year we have a different Native artist. This year we have an artist who is our first female artist who's participated. And what we're trying to do is also show, what we tend to do is lump all of our Indigenous people together. Like, we are celebrating Indigenous people. But the truth is, there is so much diversity within those tribes, and they all have different traditions and different styles and different ways of being. And so we're really trying to honor and respect that. So each design is a little bit different in what tribe the person has come from.
That is so beautiful. And no shade to whoever won, but I'm shocked that you guys didn't win because
We were a little
that just
shocked
sounds
too, but it's okay.
well, you won in my heart.
Thank you.
That
Thank you.
that sounds incredible. And I think you and I talked about this a little bit. Like probably more schools need to be thinking about the heritage of the people on whose land we built our institutions. And
Absolutely.
in some cases, like physically booted them off to be able to do it. Like they weren't already off. We booted them off
Yeah.
to be able to do it.
We did, yeah. And
Yeah.
Nike actually sent out the first year that we did it, they sent execs out to the game and they were like, "We've never seen it done this way before." And we were like, "I'm kind of shocked by that, but I'm glad to be leading the way and showing how it can be a bigger event than maybe just having turquoise jerseys."
That's super cool.
Yeah.
I can't wait to see how that evolves,
Yeah.
as you go forward. Well, Jenny, this has been absolutely fabulous conversation, which I expected nothing less. If people are like, "Hey, Jenny, you're awesome," which of course they're going to be, where can they find you?
Oh my gosh. Okay. So I know we're like in this weird social media vortex right now. I am on LinkedIn. I'm also on Blue Sky and I'm on Threads as I am Jenny Petty. And I'm always happy to talk to people. I love connecting with other people in this industry and sharing what's working for you, what's working for us. I love helping folks. So reach out anytime.
Listeners, as always, you can find me on LinkedIn at Jaime Hunt, Jaime. I'm on Blue Sky at Higher Ed CMO. I have left Threads. I'm trying to get off of Meta a little bit, so I'm not really using Threads. This is such a weird time when you're like, I don't want to support certain types of corporations, and yet it's my way I stay in touch with my family or fill in the blank.
I know, I know. And when you read On Tyranny, you'll just want to completely get off the grid and move
Oh
to
no.
a cabin in the woods. I know. So
Yeah, yeah. So that's where you can find me. You can also find me on my website, solvehighered.com. I love hearing from you, so please feel free to reach out at any time. And until then, let's go bust some silos. Confessions of a Higher Ed CMO is part of the Enrollify podcast network. If you like this podcast, chances are you'll like other Enrollify shows too. Our podcast network is growing by the month. We've got a plethora of marketing, enrollment, and higher ed technology shows that are jam-packed with stories, ideas, and frameworks, all designed to empower you to be a better higher ed professional. Our shows help higher ed marketers and admissions professionals find their next big idea and feature a selection of the industry best as your host. Learn from Mallory Wilsey, Seth Odell, Jenny Lee Fowler, Eddie Francis, and so many other of your favorite leaders in higher ed. Enrollify is made possible by Element 451, the leading AI-powered all-in-one student engagement platform, helping institutions create meaningful, personalized, and engaging interactions with students. Learn more at element451.com.